and an unusually warm welcome to this, the latest edition of DF Direct Weekly, number 225, not including specials. Lots to get through this week. Joining me, first of all, Oliver Mackenzie. Hello.
Yes, Rich, should be a fun one this week, talking Xbox, Battlefield, and a bit of Nintendo even.
Absolutely, and more besides. Hi, John Linneman.
Hey guys, it's gotta say, Oliver, that was a slightly less enthusiastic than usual. Yes, Rich. It usually goes on a little bit more, so it's okay, man. We got this, though. The news isn't that bad today.
Absolutely not. But before we go on, of course, a shout out to store.digitalfoundry.net, the home of our merchandising wares. If you want to support the team via purchasing apparel and other sundry items, that's the place to go. But with that, let's move on to our first news topic of the week. Okay, so we're going to actually cover this. Well, we were thinking of covering it last week. Leaks emerged via Moore's Law is Dead of a new console APU, presumably a console APU codenamed Magnus. Which looks like a quite extraordinary design, a kind of custom SoC with bespoke graphics core and CPU core, kind of melded together with like a bridge. So really interesting stuff. Now, we weren't really, how can I say this? We didn't really have too much to say about it. There are a lot of question marks about it, but there has been some clarification emerging this week, and reputable sources coming forward with a bit more clarification about what's going on. It does look as though Magnus is part of the next generation Xbox lineup, and there's some fascinating qualities to it, right, Oliver?
Yes, it's very interesting. And I'll go through some of those qualities now. But yeah, initially it was kind of a curious situation because I didn't really know what to make of it exactly, but there's been some more information that's come out recently about the design, and some information has been rumored out there. It's basically a dual chip design with, I think, about a 264 millimeter squared GPU die, and I think about 140 millimeter squared CPU die. On the CPU die, you have 3 Zen 6 cores, and apparently 8 Zen 6C cores, so probably similar to the Zen 6 core design, but with less cache there, much less cache than those on those parts. On the GPU die, you have a memory bus that was initially reported out as 384 bits, but now it seems like it might be 192 bits there with GDDR7. In terms of the GPU configuration, there's some talk of it potentially being 68 CUs. That's the number that's floating about, or something in that range apparently has been estimated. So yeah, I think it's an interesting design. It's certainly an ambitious design from a die size area perspective. That is a considerably larger design in terms of its total configuration, its total size, than the PlayStation 5 APU, Series X, PS5 Pro, 1X, PS4 Pro, PS4. It's a bigger design than all those historical console APUs. But apparently this isn't necessarily the biggest part in this line, because the more intriguing aspect of this is the fact that apparently this so-called GPU die, this AT2 die, apparently, according to some documentation, is part of a family of GPU dies that apparently, possibly, again, take this with a grain of salt, possibly will comprise AMD's next generation graphics architectures, where maybe you'll have some ability to mix and match these graphics dies across products. So in that case, you could potentially see an Xbox with a larger graphics die than this, or potentially even a smaller graphics die than this. Again, this presumably being kind of the mid-range component with NetStack. It seems like it might be the mid-range component with NetStack. Earlier, maybe we thought it was the higher-end component, but it seems like maybe there's a much higher-end component potentially that would presumably be primarily intended for the PC market. But given this kind of mix and match, swapping of graphics dies kind of product lineup here, we could potentially see that in Xbox as well. There's just one final note of caution here. The broad strokes of this approach seem to have pretty good sourcing, but the super nitty-gritty specifics are a little bit hazier, and of course plans are subject to change. So I think this is very likely that this will be Xbox's next generation strategy, but some of the details may be different in the actual finished products. So yeah, just some interesting details here. I'm not sure how that'll play out in the market necessarily. It's a very interesting design, potentially a very powerful design, and intriguingly, it gives Microsoft potentially the ability to mix and match these dies and potentially upgrade on a more frequent basis than we've traditionally seen in the console sphere, where you have like a 7-year console life cycle, and then at that midpoint, you kind of stick a refresh in there potentially, as we've seen for the last 2 console generations. This is maybe a more iterative kind of approach to a console, quasi-console-like design.
Yeah, I mean, from my perspective, the way I see it is that it's, how can I say it without upsetting people? I see it as Microsoft basically moving away from what you would consider a traditional console-like design, which is like a monolithic APU, which is a specific size for budget reasons, right? And doesn't, it's always about a balance of performance and cost. Now, what this design seems to indicate is that, first of all, this chip does look expensive, but secondly, it also gives Microsoft potential flexibility to actually marry up any of AMD's specific graphics GPU designs with a CPU to turn it into effectively an APU or SoC, right? So in theory, Microsoft could spin up whatever kind of Xboxes they want to. And you're right, Oliver, if they are essentially going to be carrying this forward into future AMD architectures, then conceivably this sort of design could move on with every single AMD generation there is. Now, why would this happen? It's because I think Microsoft wants to move away from what is the traditional console generation and basically move more into phase with what's happening on PC. And that kind of makes sense from my perspective, because the PC market is huge, and the potential here for just producing a series of quote-unquote Xboxes for various market sectors within the PC arena, just makes a lot of sense, right? It's a completely different strategy to what Sony's doing. There's no real point to be competing with what Sony's doing these days. Just kind of makes sense. And from AMD's perspective, well, they've never really been able to break through in the graphics space against NVIDIA. Let's be clear about that in terms of market share. So the concept of being able to ship entire PCs / Xbox PCs, if you will, that could potentially be complete systems at quite reasonable price points. I mean, here's the thing, right? You look at how much a pre-built costs these days with an NVIDIA GPU, Intel or AMD CPU. It's not cheap, but you've got this, condensed design that could potentially be significantly cheaper. This could be great news, not just for Xbox PCs, but also for AMD in terms of, shifting hardware, right? There's a lot going on here. I think looking at the leaked design, one thing which sort of caught my eyes is that the graphics die, I think, was it, Oliver, about 267 square millimeters is the
264, I think.
264.
Yeah.
Right, okay. The PlayStation, I mean, this is apparently a 3 nanometer part, if I'm understanding things correctly. The PS5 Pro APU on 4 nanometers is like 270, 280, I think. If there's, and that's got 60 CUs, I'm assuming 64 with 4 disabled. So all I can really say is, on this new process node, if this is the 82 chip with 68 CUs, then those CUs must have a lot more logic in them. And therefore, the rumors that we've been hearing about big rasterization uplifts, potential for huge uplifts to ray tracing, machine learning, etc., all kind of comes together in terms of how this leak is sort of shaping up. So I guess from there, the question is, when's it going to happen? And if it's going to happen in concert with when RDNA 5 is going to launch, that's not going to be too far away. So, Xbox could be stealing a march on Sony then. But at the same time, I guess the question is, we're still couching things in terms of Sony versus Microsoft, when I think the whole sort of discussion is going to be changing when we actually see the price points of these things. It's possibly more likely going to be the cost of an Xbox PC versus a traditional pre-built with an AMD / NVIDIA design. So radical, but potentially rather exciting, potentially very performant, which is what we want to see. And I'm excited. I'm here for this. It's looking pretty impressive, assuming it all pans out. I mean, there's a lot of reading the tea leaves here, so to speak. But yeah, exciting stuff. Thoughts, John?
Well, I have one question for you, Rich. Do you think Xbox Magnus can run GTA 6 at 60 frames per second? That's the question on everyone's mind.
I think
that's a good question.
I guess we'll find out. No, I mean, this is really interesting stuff, and it all sort of aligns with what we were kind of thinking about the future of Xbox. And when you talk about the sort of more modular design, that actually makes a lot of sense for what we've been thinking, right? Because it gives them that flexibility to sort of customize the box according to the price point they want to target. I guess what's interesting, though, is, so I'm imagining like a line of Xbox-based hardware, right? Similar to what they do with Surface, but it's interesting that Surface has pivoted fully towards ARM, right?
Yeah.
Whereas Xbox would obviously not be doing that right now. So it kind of creates this interesting sort of like, I don't know, mix within Microsoft's own hardware lineup. And I'm curious to see how that would shake out then. But I mean, ARM is not really an option here, I would say. We've talked about this before. I mean,
not if you're going to be running Steam storefronts on
it. No. That's exactly. So, yeah, I don't know. I'm very curious to see it goes. I'm curious to see what the price points look like. I mean, theoretically, they could still try to get some more affordable boxes out of this, but it seems like given the size and everything, I'm curious to see how low the entry-level Xbox PC might be. And what the high end looks like, but yeah, we'll wait and see.
I think more expensive is inevitable.
I think that's probably right.
But at the same time, they are seemingly shifting where they're actually, which market they're addressing here. And I think it kind of makes sense. I still think at the lower end, there is likely to be some sort of still a monolithic APU for, smaller devices, potential handhelds, etc. We're obviously seeing the Z2 Extreme in the Xbox ROG Ally X. I do think we'll still continue to see those smaller APUs put together, but it looks as though with what we're seeing with Magnus, it's a more comprehensive solution for scaling an entire stack of devices. I mean, I guess at that point, how many Xboxes do you need? I suspect just a super high-end one, a mainstream one, and then whatever there is for handheld. But in theory, that they could produce whatever they want, based on this.
So really what do you think the ROG Ally stuff, the Ally X means for this potential lineup here? Because, one would assume maybe that they would be aiming for a proper like Microsoft branded line of hardware. Or do you think that they're going to be working primarily with third parties like ASUS and whatnot to create these sort of devices that are Xbox themed, but not actually like proper Microsoft developed devices?
I think that the concept of hooking up with OEMs would extend to the entire stack. You could indeed have an ASUS Xbox based on a Magnus style chip. I think there's no reason why not. Because I think the other thing about the PC market is the diversity of options out there, and there's a market for that kind of thing. So
So effectively, what is happening here is that Microsoft is actually going to be executing on the original 3DO model, right? And they've done it in a roundabout way because the basis of all these machines is Windows, which is a Microsoft product, right?
Yeah.
And then they're just like, siphoning down to focus on Xbox for these products, right? But the idea is that, the back end, the support, that's all Microsoft based, and then other companies can create hardware around that, which is exactly what Trip Hawkins tried to do with the 3DO before it was possible, I guess you could say. But if they can pull this off, then this stands to be pretty lucrative, I would say.
Yeah.
Because they're like freeing themselves from the shackles of the traditional console market and sort of spreading out their wares amongst a much larger base without having to invest in the same amount of like hardware development and support that they've had to in the past, right? Like this kind of the Xbox 360 Red Ring situation, for instance, would not really be a thing in this new world, right?
I think they learned a lot of lessons from that straight after the Red Ring.
No doubt, but it's just interesting to see it evolve, and of course, everything being an Xbox, that also includes competing consoles, which maybe they're not even considered competing anymore after this point, right? It's more like just other places for their software to land.
Right. So, I think another thing, I don't know what you think about this, Oliver, but there's almost like consolidation around Windows, and I think Windows kind of needs that consolidation. It needs shoring up because the competition from SteamOS is highly significant.
I do think that they need that kind of consolidation to force Microsoft's hand to make Windows a better gaming OS in general. Certainly a better OS for gaming uses on controller devices, not on the mouse and keyboard. I think that definitely needs to improve a lot here. And when you look at like the initial effort with the Xbox ROG Ally, Asus ROG Xbox Ally, I'm losing track of that one. They're doing quite a lot there. I still think they have a lot of ground to cover. Shader compilations, one potential issue, wake sleep.
Yeah.
Lots of issues down the line that Microsoft needs to address beyond just the narrow kind of interface concerns that you might have when you're using a gamepad. But I would expect this effort would try to tackle all those problems in a way at least as comprehensive as the Steam Deck, if not aiming a little bit higher than that in the end for these products, because obviously this is a big push for Microsoft. And if this is going to be their kind of competing line with Sony, even if the prices are a bit higher, I think they really do need to nail that effort and actually make this a really good console-like operating experience, because so far Windows is definitely not that. No matter how many things you throw into it, it's not quite that at the moment.
I mean, I do still have concerns about the Asus Xbox ROG Ally, primarily that it's arriving ahead of time before RDNA 5. I mean, RDNA 5 does seem to be like a fundamental shift, a proper generational leap. It seems to be, targeting things like machine learning in a way that the existing hardware doesn't. So I am wondering the extent to which there will be longevity for the Ally X based on, it's fundamentally still an RDNA 3.5 GPU, as I understand it. That does slightly concern me. I do wonder whether it is kind of like a sort of frontier device, if you like, because there's a lot of work that needs to happen with Windows, and it does help if there's, a target device to build it around. But the extent to which the Ally X and especially the entry level Ally, tricky. I think.
Thinking of that, Rich, what do you think all of this looks like for the Xbox One line of devices, right? Which is a through line through the Xbox Series consoles. Do you think this is just like the end of that line, or that it'll sort of slowly trickle off and development support dries up and then it's just gone? Like, what does this look like to you?
Yeah, I think that's basically what you just said. Xbox One, I think, is kind of like pushing up the daisies at this point. Series consoles, though, there's probably going to be something. If I had to just hazard a guess, when you look at what the GDK did in kind of unifying development for PC, Xbox One, and Xbox Series devices, it'll probably work in a similar way to that.
So based on their strategies with Xbox Series, then regarding backwards compatibility, I suppose this would mean that we should be getting hopefully 360, original Xbox, etc., and potentially, I don't know, Xbox One compatibility. What do you think? Because backwards compatibility has been very important to them, right?
Well, what do you think, Oliver? Because I reckon it's the case that all of this next generation stuff, Microsoft's committed to backwards compatibility.
Exactly.
With AMD at the hardware level there. So it should just be a thing, right? I think the only one that's a bit of a question mark is still the Ally and the Ally X.
Yeah.
Right?
I wouldn't expect that for the Ally device that there would be backwards compatibility support. Certainly not initially, if ever. That would be a concern. I could see something down the line. Maybe they could work something out, get a 360 emulator, get an original Xbox emulator working on that device. I don't think you'd see anything from the Xbox One generation of devices. Certainly nothing from the Series generation of device that obviously well outstrips the capability of the Xbox Ally, unfortunately. But yeah, I would expect that we're going to see emulation throughout the stack, in part because I think Sarah Bond, when she came out and announced the next generation Xbox collaboration with AMD, she said that backwards compatibility would be a part of that vision. So I would expect that kind of statement, Xbox's long-standing commitment to backwards compatibility, I'd expect that would translate into full backwards compatibility throughout the stack. Obviously, accepting the fact that a lot of 360 games are not on the backwards compatibility program still, and the vast majority of original Xbox games are not supported under backwards compatibility.
Oh, yes.
Hopefully that can change, but licensing issues and things like that, I can understand why that might still be a major sticking point. And certainly, I wouldn't necessarily expect an expanded program, but I would expect that program to land on the next generation Xbox devices.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. Any final thoughts, John?
No, I mean, I think we've kind of covered the gamut here, and it's more just like a wait and see at this point.
Yes.
I like these rumors. I think this is a really interesting design. But there's just still so much we don't know about what the market's going to look like, and that's what's going to be most important here, I think.
Yeah, and also the way it's all messaged, because it is quite a fundamental shift, I think. And if these rumors concerning the Ally X price points are true, then it's going to possibly be a rude awakening to the traditional console audience. But at the same time, consoles are just expensive these days. When you look at what the Pro was priced at, the fact that meaningful price cuts to the current generation basically didn't happen. Yeah.
I don't think it would make any business sense for them to continue in the subsidized console model, because they're just not finding the success they need there. And Windows is already their baby. And that's where so many games are. So this makes a ton of sense for Microsoft to take this approach. And I think how it hits with consumers is all down to the messaging. It's a big change, so it's going to require it. But I actually think they're in a good spot for this, because the last year or so has been kind of tricky for Xbox, I guess. Things seeming a little bit muddled, and there's some confusion around things, and the sudden shift to multi-platform and everything left people kind of like, what's going on with Xbox? Which is perfect. That's where you want to be when you're bringing a new project forward, I would say, like this. And it could allow them to come out looking very strong. Mm-hmm. Which is interesting, because it kind of ties into our next topic in a way, coming out of a bad situation and doing something to that works for the fans.
Okay, yeah, that's a pretty good segue there, John. So I guess we should just move on at this point. Okay, yes, second news topic of the week, as John was alluding to there, we got our first look at Battlefield 6 multiplayer gameplay. And a trailer went out along with some gameplay sessions. The trailer just looks absolutely fantastic. Just complete carnage from start to finish. Looking absolutely tremendous. Kind of like a distillation of how you would imagine Battlefield to be in a kind of idealized scenario. And there it is. John, thoughts?
Wow, yeah. I mean, one, Fred Durst is back, which is, he's in there. No, really. So watching through the whole presentation and everything, it's very interesting to see what they're doing here, because it's very clear that they took a lot of the feedback from the last 3 games or so, especially the last 2, to heart. Those games were not that popular. I think they did okay. But the Battlefield community largely rejected what they were doing, especially with 2042. And this, to me, looks like a proper return to form in a way. Like, they're back. It's 4 classes, right? You get the main classes. They're bringing back classic modes properly. They're focusing on a more realistic, serious military setting without crazy... Call of Duty... It's become almost a parody at this point, because it's chasing the Fortnite stuff. It is funny to see the Terminator and Beavis and Butthead running around, but it really kills the vibes. And Battlefield seems to be saying, all right, we reject that now. This is more like a serious stage. And that's cool. I think that works. Battlefield does not need to get goofy in that sense. But the big thing that really stands out here is that they're going all in on destruction. not the Levolution stuff like Battlefield 4 and such, where, you know, there was like a scripted event that would occur like once per match and it was awesome looking, but it was ultimately very like scripted and simple in that sense. Like, oh, this thing's happening, you know, now the level changes in this way. Where the destructive here seems far more organic. And, you know, when they show the sledgehammer come out, it really sort of sets this statement of intent where it's like, hey, you know, this isn't just about like a cool visual effect or changing the level layout. This is about the destruction of buildings and objects factoring directly into the gameplay. You know, burrowing through walls, smashing down through the ceiling, to like, you know, get people like surprise attacks, tanks blowing up the entire like sides of buildings, revealing the skeleton within, like everything just crumbling around you. That stuff is awesome. And I think that is something that a lot of people are going to be excited to see come back. And and it's not just that it's cool conceptually, it looks cool, right? Like the actual destruction's happening, like the way it's like actually executed, the crumbling of buildings, the particle effects, everything. Like when, like, I love how they very specifically showed the drone with the C4 on it fly into the bridge, and then he explodes it there, which, you know, that actually was something that was people would do back in Battlefield in the old days. And then the way it actually breaks apart, it looks freaking phenomenal. Or there's that scene shortly after where they zoom in on a corpse falling and hitting the floor. And I'm curious to see if this plays out in gameplay. You can see the spent shell casings all laying around on the floor. And when he hits the floor, they all kind of like jump up a little bit from the weight of his impact. So it seems to me like there's just this attention to detail on granular things now that is kind of what I think people will want to see here. Plus, it's, you know, it's the next Frostbite looking game. And as usual, it looks great. You know, the rendering of the characters, the environments, the particle effects, explosions, everything is top tier. I'm not seeing any evidence of like ray tracing features in here. So I'm suspecting that they've either completely cut that or, you know, taken a different approach. But I mean, in the last game, it was literally just like RTAO at this point and not that great. And by the way, I actually was recently playing the last Battlefield game just out of curiosity again, because it's been a while. I mean, it still plays okay, but man, it feels so Spartan and just like old in a way. Like, it's very strange. Like, it, in my mind, it's like, this looks significantly worse than like Battlefield 1, Battlefield 5. Like, it just doesn't work that well. And this feels like a more return to form to DICE being on the top frontier of high-end visuals in these military games. So, and of course, they had that whole presentation in the auditorium where they talked about things. There's a campaign coming back, which is cool.
Yeah.
I mean, not everybody loved them, but I actually was quite a fan of the Battlefield 4 campaign. You know, it was fairly linear and scripted in many ways, but there was some cool stuff in there. And it was fun. And I'm happy that they're actually taking another shot at that.
Absolutely.
So that's cool. And I guess it's Vince Zampella, of Call of Duty fame, right? Who's like the director on the game now. So, that's pretty wild, right? They got somebody with a very strong track record of making amazing first person shooter games. Of course from Respawn as well, right? So like Titanfall 2 and everything. So that's, I don't know, it feels to me like everything's lining up in a way where like they might actually have like a proper serious hit on their hands this time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
They're doing the things that people wanted from Battlefield again.
Yeah, I think it's just the concept that, you know, literally anything can happen at any point, and it's all driven by that physics engine. And it's great that the goofy stuff still happens, right? Because it's kind of just highly amusing. And I just don't think they fumbled it at all. You know, I was expecting like, you know, the trailer to end and then suddenly like, introducing Nicki Minaj or something like that.
Yeah,
you know?
Thank God they're not doing that.
But no, it was just faultless from start to finish.
The humor is very subtle in fun ways, like the sledgehammer having knock knock written on it, right? Like, it's like, okay. That's the kind of humor that works here in Battlefield.
It clearly looked like PC, so the extent to which it scales to console is, I guess, still up in the air. But fingers crossed there. Oliver, what do you think?
Yeah, I thought to me this reminded me a lot of another older Battlefield game that was fairly instrumental in my earlier years, which is Battlefield 3, in part because of the smaller environments, the focus on cityscapes, the more Middle Eastern locales. It seems more infantry focused, and that's an area where Battlefield 3 really took the series in a bit of a different direction. And since they've kind of subsequently expanded the scope, especially in Battlefield 2042, which had these gigantic 128-player matches that looked very Spartan, like John said, because they were trying to accommodate this massive player count. And, that did not work out so well. But I do like they've brought back the classic 4-class structure as well here. Obviously, in 2042, they brought it more towards a hero class structure. That was not so warmly received. I think this is a much better choice. And even the game's visuals look reminiscent of Battlefield 3, like the kind of lens flares, the dirt building up everywhere, the smoke, the kind of desaturated bluish tan hues of the concrete and the dirt. It just feels very like a 2011 Battlefield 3. That feels cool. Even the music, which kind of has that symphonic electronic trailer music sound to it, sounds very different from the kind of glitchy, bizarre Battlefield 2042 music. Much more reminiscent of Battlefield 3, in my opinion. I do like the destruction. I think it's still state-based destruction as opposed to necessarily completely physics-based destruction.
Right.
Yeah.
No doubt.
So I don't think it's changed fundamentally, but when you look at the level of debris and that kind of feeling of destruction, and even things like how the smoke and dust hang in the air for a long time after things come down, I think that's a very clear distinction between those older Battlefield titles. It looks very different. It looks more granular as well. I think it is still that state-based kind of system there, but that's pretty cool. Visually, I think it's mostly positive. It looks, you kind of look at this and it looks a little bit like the older Battlefield titles, but with much greater detail, much improved pyrotechnics. It kind of reads plausibly like a real environment, where if you go back to 2042, that game had these huge maps, right, set in city centers, but they didn't really look like it. They looked totally clean, totally sterile, even though it's this place with a ton of explosions and stuff going on. There wasn't any rubble around. There wasn't any kind of dust or newspapers or things like this. It looked very sterile. This looks like a real lived-in city, and I think they've just nailed that feeling. My only kind of exception to that relatively strong appraisal of the graphics and what they've done here is just in some moments I kind of saw lighting that looked a little bit video gamey in some places, in shadowed regions, sometimes indoor environments. Sometimes you see that SSAO a little bit poking through in kind of a video gamey way. Nothing too bad, but just something that maybe indicates there's not a huge RT lighting solution on display here necessarily. But for a multiplayer game that moves very quickly, it has to support 60 FPS gameplay on, consoles, mainstream PCs. I think that's totally fine. And presumably they achieve good image quality. Battlefield 2042 had, I think, very good image quality on consoles as well, with, I think, what was checkerboarding at the time. I don't know if they'd adopt the checkerboarding technique here as well, or if they would resort to something like FSR, potentially. Obviously, the Dead Space games used FSR from EA, as well as Dragon Age the Veilguard last year. So there is some precedent there, or if they'd roll their own solution or something. But yeah, just a few thoughts. I think this is shaping up to be a pretty cool game. Very reminiscent of Battlefield 3, which I quite like. And just looks quite polished. And apparently they've been prototyping this game and playtesting it much more extensively than prior Battlefield games, which is kind of cool. So they've actually been working on this game and iterating on the gameplay in a way much earlier in the development cycle than is typical with these kinds of games. So I think that's a cool little detail as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I guess the only thing from my perspective that caught my eye from the trailer that I was a bit sort of 50-50 about, the post-processing on it kind of looked different to all the gameplay that I've seen, which was kind of interesting. Also, there were some frame drops in that trailer, and I was thinking to myself, if you've got frame drops in a trailer that's designed to showcase the game, how does that reflect on actual performance? But then you can go and look at there's various sort of extended gameplay clips on YouTube now, and it actually looks fine there. So I think maybe it was just either they didn't throw enough horsepower at the trailer, or the trailer was simply just everything ramps up to sort of maximums there. But I think, the takeaway is, especially when you see the gameplay, that Battlefield is back. It's back to the classic formula, but refined and improved in ways that you would expect from, modern hardware. Do get what you're saying about the lighting, though, Oliver. I agree with you 100% there. The game's kind of moved on since, real-time global illumination, ray trace global illumination has come on the scene. But again, maybe it's simply to ensure good performance across the board. And, but who knows what will happen in the future. But certainly, looks pretty good.
That kind of creates interesting problems, though, right, Rich? Like, most multiplayer games are focused on performance. But you could argue that Fortnite, for instance, has the Lumen GI path, right? But not every version, you don't have to use it. Not every version actually has that either for performance reasons, which means they have to maintain a Lumen GI version and a software, not ray traced lighting version as well, which adds additional stress, I guess, to the development team side of things. And since they're not selling an engine here, I can more realistically understand. And I'm not even sure. We've never actually seen anything in Frostbite, that has RTGI enabled, have we?
I don't
Can you think of anything? It's been Reflections and RTAO and such, but nothing really beyond that. So, I can kind of see why it's not there. But you're right. As interior spaces, especially looking at Jack Fragg's gameplay here, that's definitely one limitation for sure.
Absolutely. But we're hugely excited by it. So, let's just wait and see what happens next. Can't wait to go hands-on. Let's move on. So yesterday, as of this filming, Nintendo decided to put out a new Nintendo Direct, and it was specifically targeting third-party games. I say targeting, it sounds as though it would be like targeting for termination, but no, it was a third-party showcase, partner showcase, so to speak. A lot of games in there. I don't think it quite hit with the same amount of positivity as previous Directs, but nonetheless, there were some really interesting titles in there. And I guess, Oliver, we should start with the kind of next yardstick game for Switch 2's technical capabilities, Star Wars Outlaws, which is an interesting one that we've been eagerly awaiting, simply because it's a current gen only game. It was, designed to run at, Xbox Series S minimum, and yet here it is running on Switch 2. Also curious to see that it's Ubisoft Red Links that were doing the port for that. I guess those trials. Yeah.
Whoa.
So
okay.
that was there was on the Nintendo YouTube channel. There's a secondary video which seems to be an interview with Red Links there. But the Direct itself, actual gameplay, a lot more of it than we've seen before, and you can kind of understand how it works now. But nonetheless, there are some impressive bits in it.
There are absolutely some impressive bits, in particular, certain moments where you really do get a sense of that really nice GI presentation, those reflections. But I would say overall, there are a lot of cutbacks here in different kind of areas of the presentation that you can see pretty clearly, even without a side-by-side comparison. Draw distance and just detail in general is pared back. Like when the camera reveals the environment at the beginning of the trailer, it looks fine, but Outlaws is really foliage-rich in other platforms, and I'm not really seeing that here. I'm seeing some scattered bushes and things like that, but not necessarily that kind of full suite of foliage across the frame like I might expect in an area like this. Shadow resolution is also very low. That's particularly noticeable in the cutscene sequences where you see those kinds of blocky outlines that look very aliased and not great. Again, Outlaws did not have great shadow resolution at the best of times on other platforms, but that's been reduced somewhat here. Image quality also doesn't look amazing, but it's kind of hard to tell because most of the footage that we have here only comes from a live stream rip because Ubisoft did not publish this trailer separately as a published video on, let's say, their own YouTube channel, which is weird. It's also the second time it's happened with this game. They also did not publish the very first Nintendo Switch 2 trailer for this game either, which is a little bit odd. So I think there's probably still RTGI in the mix, but it does look very messy, I would say. Like you can see that when the ship leaves the hangar in this kind of second shot, there's a ton of noise and the vehicle kind of disoccludes that environmental panel, which I presume is like all screen space traces that are needing to get refactored there. The other problem, the other very significant visual problem that I noticed that immediately stuck out to me is the game is running at a relatively low frame rate in the cutscene sequences. I counted out one cutscene and it was counting out at like 25 FPS, so I presume it's just a little bit heavy there for this game. The source asset for this file appears to be a 60 hertz asset, and when I was going through the frames, there are definitely some delays between those updates that were not ideal there. So I'm hoping for a good outcome here, but everything I've seen so far has been not that positive. I mean, it still looks like Star Wars Outlaws. That's a critical thing. It still looks like it. It's still, very recognizable Star Wars Outlaws. There's some impressive stuff going on here. For sure, translating a game on consoles that has like 2 ray traced effects turned on at all times, trying to translate the Switch in a visually kind of cromulent way. It's a tough challenge. But maybe this is just a bit too much to port, especially at like this early stage in Switch 2's life cycle. We're going to have to see on this one. But so far, I'm not really seeing like that kind of super polished experience. But people might be looking forward to this title on the Switch too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, John, what do you think about Outlaws there?
Oh, man. I feel like we're right back in that same place that the Switch kind of was with third-party
I know what
ports,
you're going
right?
to say, yeah.
You know what I mean? Where it always feels...
area.
Yeah, where it's like the Switch 2 is significantly more powerful, but it's still trying to run games way above its spec. And we're getting a lot of the same results and just like low-res assets in there, major cutbacks, reduced image quality, everything like is very obviously cut way back from the other versions in a way that like makes it just look like not great. And I know we're in a tricky position because for third-party games like this, like these are designed for multiple platforms, and this is just the way things are. But like when you think about Switch 2, it's like, well, more like PS4 class visuals, but running with good image quality and frame rate is kind of like what I think is more suitable for Switch 2, right? Rather than trying to do these things that are clearly above what it's capable of. And we're just seeing the results here. I assume this will look pretty good in portable mode, hopefully. But yeah, man, like I mean, obviously my perspective's a little shifted. I haven't actually played the console versions of the original Outlaws. I played it on a high-spec PC.
Yeah.
And it's gorgeous there, like absolutely amazing. But you look at this and it's just like, oof. But people enjoyed Cyberpunk on the Switch too. And it was interesting to see. And I suppose this just opens up the audience further for this game as well. And I think Star Wars Outlaws is criminally underrated. I'm still in awe of the Eurogame review. Like, I was just like, what are they even doing here? It's just, I'm genuinely unsure as to why the reception was the way it was, because this is a game that tried to fix a lot of the open world like bloat problems, and it made something that was far more streamlined and interesting and organic to explore, and didn't like pound the player with like a million arrow marks and saying, go here, do all these little stupid things. It was far more interesting than that. So it's a very cool game. And I hope that it actually still finds some success here on Switch.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Other titles, of course, in that 25-minute Nintendo Direct presentation. Where do you want to go next, Oliver? Maybe the Square Enix HD 2D games? We saw 2 of them in quick succession that sort of ended the presentation there.
The more interesting of the 2 was the pedestrianly named The Adventures of Elliot, which I don't know what Square Enix was doing with it. It's also set in like a name like sounds like Philadelphia. I can't even remember, but anyways, I
sound like saying Philadelphia if you're drunk.
Yeah, if you're slurring, it's hard to say.
Slurring it like
yeah. I mean, I'm kind of a little bit sick of the HD 2D look to some degree. I think it was interesting like 8 years ago, but this looks a little bit different to me. It looks kind of more like a PS1 game-ish, reimagined in some respects, than like a SNES game. It has that mix of like that chunky 3D with the kind of blocky textures, and then of course the more advanced lighting tech and the sprites. But of course, a lot of PS1 games still use sprites. So Looks quite good. My only real complaint is that it's dropping frames from 60 FPS in some places, which is not like the worst thing in the world, especially for a game like this, which is like more of an RPG, a little bit slower paced. It's perfectly fine, and it's mostly 60 FPS, but that's one area where I would like to hopefully see things tightened up a little bit, potentially.
There is a demo out, actually, Oliver, but I don't think any of us got to try it yet, so...
Oh, okay, yeah. And then there's also Octopath Traveler 0. I guess some kind of prequel or something here. It looks very similar to the other Octopath Travelers games. Yeah, it looks very similar here, and it's on Switch 2 as well as the original Switch and other platforms. There's some controversy about the fact that the Switch 1 version can't be upgraded to the Switch 2 version, which itself is another classic game key card, even though the download's only 5 gigabytes. So some kind of noise about that. But other than that, it looks, it's that kind of like classic burnt umber kind of HD 2D look to it that is not quite as visually exciting as I would say The Adventures of Elliot is, in my opinion.
Mm-hmm. Okay, what do you think, John?
Yeah, I mean, Adventures of Elliot, I actually have downloaded the demo, but haven't gotten to sink in yet. But that looks super awesome to me, because up till now, all the HD 2D games have been turn-based RPGs, which is awesome. But this is like a proper, more like, Zelda Mana-like action RPG. And I think that's really potentially very interesting and should be quite a different experience. I'm also happy it's like a new RPG rather than like a remake again, which we've seen plenty of as well. And it looks great. I'm very, very excited to play it, despite the extremely weird name. I don't know where that comes from.
They just must really like Elliot.
I mean, Square Enix loves weird names. Let's be clear. So that stuff's cool, I think. And Octopath, of course, I don't know for sure, but I think it is. It's like an enhanced version of the game derived probably from the stuff they did on mobile platforms. So we'll see how that goes. I don't know. But speaking of HD 2D, they did actually, I guess, I haven't tested it, but they released apparently an update for Dragon Quest III's remake, bringing it up to support Switch 2 with higher resolution and 60 FPS. So that's very cool. And it also made me wonder if maybe Octopath Traveler 2 could receive something like that, because those games on Switch 1 have pretty serious issues with frame pacing. They target 30 and they have bad frame pacing, so which is not great. They would also benefit from that coming up here.
Okay.
So yeah, that's not the only RPG. Actually, we got a very quick look at Persona 3 Reload, which was announced for Switch 2, right? And there was one scene in particular where they show him running down the hallway in School Building 2F. At the end of that hallway, as Oliver would very well remember, there are mirrors that relied on ray tracing in all the other versions of this game. And I'm not seeing that here. It just looks like, if you look at the hallway there at the very end, it's just a flat, opaque surface with nothing on it. And that's ray tracing is not important to this game, I would argue, but and we don't know, maybe it is there, but I was very curious to see if this was going to end up being one of the first Switch games to ship with ray tracing support. And it's looking, at least based on this little bit of trailer, that might in fact not be the case.
Yeah, I would say that ray tracing is kind of unlikely here, not just based off of that shot, but also there's a shot in the classroom where you see those kind of window panes, right? And in the game on the Series X, on the PS5, on the PC, if you had the higher settings turned on, that would actually reflect this very clean, sharp view of the room as well. And maybe the angle there is not quite 100% perfect, but I think I would see a little bit of an impression of that reflection, and that's not here. And that's kind of disappointing in some respects, because the RT reflections on PCs and consoles were very cheap before. They're running on the consoles at 60 FPS. I kind of hope that would be here, but it's not a huge deal for the game's overall visual presentation, because they're very specifically used, in particular, in the non-combat sequences in the world of the game. They're used for like mirrors and other very, very glossy surfaces. They're not a huge part of the game, but yeah, not a part of the game here. I do have some other potential critiques as well visually. Unfortunately, I do have to say the game has some problems with its presentation of the frame rate. It runs only at 30 FPS, which is fine enough, I suppose, but it also has uneven frame pacing, which is really annoying. That is really annoying. And based on other Switch 2 games, that might not be solved necessarily by going into portable mode either. Unless they've explicitly implemented like 120 hertz LFC here, that might not be the case, right? I would say input lag doesn't matter at all here. If they could just get the frame rate cap working correctly, that would be a huge boon. And this was also a problem on PS4, on Xbox One, on those last generation versions of the game that ran at 30 FPS. Huge problem with this game, huge problem with a lot of Unreal games. I hope they fix it. I don't think they will. There's also no DLSS presentation here either. The image looks quite raw, not very well treated. That's disappointing, but the PC version also didn't have DLSS, also didn't have FSR2, didn't really have any effective AA solution there necessarily. But overall, I think I'm happy about this. I'm happy the game is reaching a broader audience. I'm happy that the game is arriving on Switch 2. I think it's a good fit for the Switch 2. If you told me that the game was arriving on Switch 2, it fits graphically, visually, it works in the Switch 2. I think it does, and I think we see that from this trailer. It mostly does appear in a pretty good form on the Switch 2. And it's also just a good fit for mobile platforms in general because of the kind of pick up and play, kind of day-by-day nature of the game. It kind of has these natural stop points all the time when you're playing. Every like 10 minutes, 5 minutes, whatever. Save and stop and go and do something else, right? So I think it's a good fit for the Switch 2, but potentially not actually a great port necessarily because of those issues. But by far the biggest one there, if I could get one word out to Alice, is just please fix the frame pacing, because that's really irritating to me and will really wreck, I think, a lot of people's appreciation of this game's visuals.
Hey, and Sega's listened to us before, the monkey ball situation, if you recall, last year. I think it was last year. So got word back to them, and they actually did correct the frame pacing. So, well, actually, in that case, it was more like the Unity 50 hertz thing. But still, this should be similarly feasible to fix it.
Yeah, fair enough. Let's talk Hyrule Warriors Age.
Wait, Rich. I think you're missing something, buddy.
Go on.
The biggest game of the show, Chillin' by the Fire. You know, where you roll up on this beach and you're making fires and roasting marshmallows, and giant floating smeary 480p looking video streams of your buddies can stand next to you.
Yeah.
Doing the same thing, and you can all just chill on the beach, I guess. In fact, this feels like I'm looking at an Oculus DK2 demo from a decade ago. So yeah, baby. I know. I'm feeling like we should probably do the next direct. It should have been this one, realistically, in Chilling by the Fire. You know,
right?
Absolutely.
Okay. Yeah.
You're not convinced?
No.
All right then.
Maybe we should be talking about Hyrule Warriors: Age of Imprisonment.
Okay. Perhaps.
What do you think, Oliver? 'Cause it seems to be shaping up quite nicely.
I think it looks all right here. I think it looks pretty decent in terms of the way they've constructed the visuals, in terms of the way they built it out. But there are some notes here that I wanted to touch on. It looks like it's using FSR1 or something similar to that, just in terms of there's some edge enhancement going on, and that edges have that distinctive like FSR1 roundedness to them. Obviously, we've seen this a lot in Nintendo's own titles, but here it seems to be applied in a little bit of a less elegant way, I would say, than some of Nintendo's first-party fare. I counted it out a little bit here in terms of pixel counts, and it was counting out a little under 1080p. In prior showings, it's counted out closer to 720p, and in other clear shots I was able to count here, so perhaps there's some DRS involved. It's also running at 30 FPS, which we've seen again in prior showings as well. I do kind of wonder, I think this is the kind of game that would really benefit, if at all possible, from a 60 FPS update. Would benefit, I'm sure, a lot from the adoption of techniques like DLSS. And it's kind of unfortunate that even in the kind of second-party fare that Nintendo is producing for Switch 2, that we're not seeing some of those elements. And I'm honestly not 100% sure why we aren't seeing the adoption of techniques like DLSS here. I mean, it could be for a number of reasons, but it certainly seems like something that would be would be a fairly prudent thing to do, especially considering like all the pixel crawling you tend to see in games like this and the massive hordes of enemy foes and all the kinds of aliasing that would engender does not seem necessarily too positive here. But yeah, I think this is shaping up to be a game that at least runs a lot better than Age of Calamity. I'll grant that. It looks a fair bit better than Age of Calamity. So by that standard, I'm sure it will be a perfectly fine Warriors style, Muso style game. But by the standards of people who are looking at Switch 2 and kind of expecting that kind of real next step in terms of we're delivering like this real next level visual experience, I'm not sure that this game is necessarily showing off so well.
Do you agree there, John?
Yes, I do 100% agree. And I was thinking, like, I really wish we had one of those, like, Men in Black style, like, memory erasing devices to, like, it's like, okay, you've never seen FSR1, Nintendo. Like, get rid of it. Like, wow. I'm tired of it. It's not a good choice here. But I guess I would say, though, Oliver, like, you're right when you mentioned the previous game, and that's why I feel like just having a stable 30 FPS is already a gigantic improvement over what that was on the original Switch, right? So, like, expecting them to get to 60 FPS from there, that's that might be quite a reach. So, I think this it works visually, though, just because the style is good as before, and so I think that holds up all right. But yeah, it's, I'm not super into Muso style games these days.
You used to be fully on board, John.
I enjoyed them for a while. I liked them on PS2, during the PS3 era, stuff like Gundam Muso and everything was quite fun. And some of the others, were quite good, but like, the formula hasn't evolved that much. Though, to be fair, I guess the Zelda ones have done some cool stuff. So, we'll see. I'm still interested enough to give it a shot.
Okay. Those were the titles we kind of singled out there, but there's a kind of, I don't know, do you have any sort of overall thoughts, Oliver, on what we were seeing beyond those titles?
Yeah, I mean, there were a couple other games that we could mention here. There's a port of Apex Legends, which, unlike the Switch port of Apex Legends, is running at 60 FPS and looks to be running in pretty good form here with, nicely temporally treated visuals. Looks like a high-quality port. There's also the upcoming Chronos by Bloober Team. Looks intriguing.
Right. Yeah.
Looks pretty good here. Running pretty well. Looking pretty good. I'm excited to see how that turns out on Switch 2. We've not seen a ton of footage from that game in general. A ton of gameplay stuff. They're keeping it pretty close to their chest, even though it's just a little bit more than a month out from release as we speak here. So I'm going to be excited to see how that game turns out on Switch 2. But overall, I think this presentation, I kind of regard it a little bit more positively than maybe some other people. But at the same time, I did have some higher expectations going into this presentation, just because it's the very first post-Switch 2 launch presentation from Nintendo. The very first Direct. And I know the partner Directs aren't often not up to that same level of quality as the main Nintendo Directs. A higher level of quality than the Indie World showcases, but often not up that same level of quality as the main Nintendo Directs that we tend to see. So, that is a little bit disappointing in some respects, but I expect that Nintendo is holding their cards close to their chest for a potential Super Mario 40th Anniversary Direct or something to coincide with that release in August or perhaps September of this year, where I would expect them to show off more of their first-party slate, as well as probably some potentially third-party heavy hitters that might get released later in this year or into 2026. I'd expect to see that later on. So I don't think this is the only salvo we're going to see from Nintendo in the next few months.
Yeah, I guess there was a lot of expectation for this one, particularly when people were talking about Red Dead Redemption 2 ports.
Yeah.
And, there's always been the kind of, there's been the sort of underlying rumor pre-launch for Switch 2 that basically everybody is porting everything to Switch 2. And that's clearly, if it is happening, we're not seeing it yet. I mean, there's some other stuff that I'd love to have seen, which we kind of do know is in development, but I guess it's just taking more time. But, I wasn't sort of, I was kind of a sort of ambivalent on the presentation. There was some good stuff in there, I thought, but at the same time, you just know that there's there's better stuff en route, I think. But, this will tide us over in the meantime. I guess, when I was looking at stuff like Madden, I was thinking that it didn't particularly impress me in terms of performance. And I do wonder whether there's a sort of porting situation going on where they bring the game across to Switch 2 and it doesn't really receive the kind of customization / optimization / dare I say it, downgrades required for good performance. And I don't think that's the best way to attack those projects, really. Just sort of get it across running at a reasonable rate. I just think good, solid performance is so crucial. And I hope that's not a trend that we're seeing. But beyond that, fairly enjoyable. It really did a disservice, though, to Switch 1 games, which just don't really look that great anymore, though, when it's sort of surrounded by Switch 2 fare. Yeah. Okay, then, John, what are your final thoughts?
Well, so one of the things nobody mentioned here, actually, that I thought was cool, was they showed off Yakuza Kiwami 2, which is running the Dragon engine. So we had Yakuza 0 at launch, but that was the older PS3 engine, right? And they actually showed off this new game here, and most of the footage was 60 FPS, which is cool because it was a mix, actually, but the PS4 versions of the Dragon engine games were all 30. So that's nice to see that, actually. So I think that's a very positive thing. They also showed that remake of Pac-Man World 2.
Oh, that did look
which
great.
is cool.
Thought, yeah.
Repack, that looks really good. So I feel like that's worth a shout. And in the Japanese direct, Nippon Ichi showed Hono Garashi no Niwa, which was like a sort of horror, like sort of life game that looked kind of interesting. I would recommend going to check that out in that one. There was actually a bunch of other games shown in the Japanese direct that didn't show up in the North American one. So if you want a few more announcements, they are in there. But my real final thoughts on this is that I think Nintendo is making some big mistakes this time with Nintendo Switch 2. I think there's plenty of time to course correct, but I think they're too afraid of leaving Switch 1 behind, and they're creating, and as a result, they've created a less compelling product with Switch 2. And
sorry, tell us more. How?
It reminds me of when they transitioned from like DS to 3DS, where they had this successful thing and they seemed afraid to go all in, and the initial release period seemed very dry, and they're not taking the opportunities to really get the excitement out there about the new system, because every time they talk about it, they always got to mention the original Switch as well. And they're just so focused on not really showing what it can do. And so all these Switch 2 games we do see, the few games that are actually Switch 2, they're mostly just ports of existing games that look worse than the other versions. That's not really exciting. It's not getting people talking about the Switch 2 all that much. And I think it doesn't have the energy the Switch 1 did. Right. And I think that comes down to the market situation. When Switch 1 was launched, the Wii U was a failure. 3DS was coming up on the end of life. Switch 1 was their everything. They had to put everything they had into it, and they shifted all messaging to Switch 1. That made it something super desirable. It was very obvious what it did. People wanted it right away. People still want the Switch 2, but I think a lot of it's just on the goodwill and love of the Switch 1. And right now, the Switch 2, I mean, it has good games to begin with, but it just feels like the messaging around it and the way that they're talking about it, it's not nearly as exciting as it should be. It feels very much like the bean counters are in charge now kind of thing. And I really think they're just like super, super afraid of letting that Switch 1 audience go to the detriment of this new hardware. And that they need to start getting some more exciting announcements, stuff that makes people say, yeah, I want to get a Switch 2 going now. But again, it's not too late. There's still plenty of time to bring that excitement back. They could do a direct in a month from now or 2 months that does all this stuff, and they're fine. But I just feel like this initial after launch period just has not been anywhere near as interesting, as exciting as one would have hoped. And certainly it's nothing compared to the Switch 1.
Interesting. Would you concur with that, Oliver?
I mean, I think certainly Nintendo's treatment of like third parties has not been great. I mean, you look on Nintendo's website and they still say that development kits are not yet available for, interested third parties potentially who are contacting them through their web interface, which is certainly a concern. I also share John's concerns potentially about the sandwiching of Switch 2 software with Switch 1 software. Does not feel like they fully committed. Indeed, apparently their messaging to developers is like, if you're shipping on Switch 1, that's wonderful. You don't need to worry about Switch 2 because you can play it on Switch 2 anyways, which does not seem like the right messaging to have around a console that's much more capable than a Switch 1. You should want bespoke versions of those games in almost all cases on Switch 2. But I would say the Switch 2 rollout to me in terms of first-party software has actually been pretty good. Donkey Kong is really, really good. I love Mario Kart World. Both those games are really solid. I was not expecting much from Donkey Kong pre-release, and that's just been a huge surprise. I've also loved Fast Fusion. To me, it in terms of the first-party output, it's at least rivaling the Switch one, if not exceeding it in that early era. But I do think that there's a concerning lack of details. I'm not concerning, but there's a certain lack of details from Nintendo on what the rest of 2025 looks like. Most of the other Nintendo first-party software has not been dated yet for 2025, which is a concern of mine. And then the third-party software is still kind of up in the air a little bit, like Final Fantasy VII Remake hasn't been dated. Other games like that are not totally nailed down at the moment. So I'd like to see more clarity on that. Perhaps they're withholding that for the Super Mario potentially themed direct that might be coming down the pipe. And I also want to see some inkling, which I hope we'll get later this year, of Nintendo's 2026 plans. I just tease would be sufficient. Just show me like that first image of Mario the plumber, that silhouette. That's enough for me, Just show us something to get people excited. That doesn't need to be a full reveal, but just give us some inkling rather, of what titles will show up in 2026.
And Oliver, that last point you said about the dev kit situation, that is seriously actually starting to cause problems, right? Like, we just had Ninja Gaiden Ragebound released, right? Yeah. Shinobi Art of Vengeance has a demo. I played the demo on there. The image quality sucks. It looks bad on the Switch too. It's not sharp at all. That art is amazing. I loaded it up on the PS5 and it's just absolutely gorgeous. So that game right there is being hamstrung by the fact that there's no native Switch 2 version. And I'm sure Nintendo told them if they tried, it's fine. Just, you got a Switch 1 version. And the Switch 1 version is 60 FPS, but the image quality sucks. It's not crisp at all. It's not good. And then you have Ninja Gaiden Ragebound, despite what they say, it's just capped at 30 FPS because of the Switch 1. And it's a 2D side-scrolling game. Like, I wanted to buy both of these games on Switch 2, but I'm not going to do that because they suck on there, right? It's this type of situation happening right now is not good. And I feel like this is a product of Nintendo being very, very limited with their development kits and this whole, just continue making it for Switch 1. It's not a good idea, and it's hurting these games, and they need to change this.
Okay, fair enough. Well, watch this space, I guess. But with that, let's move on. I wanted to talk about this week because I love gaming handhelds. I love to see the latest technology sort of squeezed down into the handheld form factor. And we've got two products coming up, which are I just think they're totally nuts. I just don't think they make sense in any way. Maybe I'm going to be completely proven wrong with this, but I'm just going to show you this, which is it's the GMK Tech mini PC. It's an Evo X2. Yeah, it's got the AMD Ryzen AI Max 395 in it. It's a really nice mini PC. It uses the Strix Halo APU, which we've discussed in the past on DF Direct. And that APU is probably the most advanced APU that AMD has ever put together. Let's just describe what it is. Basically, it's got a complete area of 449 square millimeters on 4 nanometers, bearing in mind the PS5 Pro is like, I think, 270, 280 on the same process. It comprises of a 308 square millimeter I/O die, which has the GPU on it and all a bunch of stuff on there. Two 70 millimeter dies for the CPU chiplets, 16 cores, 40 compute units, RDNA 3.5. This thing it's a bit of a beast. It's primarily designed for like laptops and mini PCs, just like that. Although Asus has got a 2-in-1 out that uses it. It's kind of nuts. I'm testing this mini PC at the moment, and I thought I'd do a PS5 Pro comparison using the Plague Tale Requiem. This is kind of like for like, and it shows that this die, I am blasting 120 watts through it, but this processor is able to match PlayStation 5 performance. It's sort of give or take depending on context, but man, this chip is huge. It costs a huge amount of money to make. It's very advanced stuff. And we've got two companies that are going to put it into a handheld. And the concept of a piece of silicon that's larger than PS5 Pro by some margin being crammed into a handheld chassis just strikes me as totally nuts. But it's happening, and I'm kind of curious as to how this is all going to come out. There's two devices that are going to be using it that are confirmed so far. The GPD Win 5, which has been confirmed. Well, this chip is seemingly so large that the form factor of the handheld has been changed to the point where it actually needs to have an external 80 watt-hour battery pack, which is kind of nuts. We've also got the ANEO Next 2, which is using the same chip. I think it does have a built-in battery. But the concept that this chip is actually going to end up in handhelds, I'm kind of in awe, but also wondering how it can possibly work. Oliver, you're kind of as obsessed with these handhelds as I am. I'm curious what you thought about this.
It's certainly very interesting. I think that GPD Win 5 is by far the most intriguing of the two devices, just because like on the surface, it looks like, okay, this is a standard PC handheld, 120 hertz VRR, 7-inch 1080p LCD, that same one I presume that Asus uses. And, it looks okay. It looks pretty normal here. It's got about the same weight as a Switch 2, actually. So that's not too heavy there. But yeah, the fact they're fitting a full Strix Halo chip in this device is pretty insane. Now, I would say in their defense that Strix Halo is still a pretty performant chip, even at 15 watts or 20 watts. It's still more performant than Strix Point at those wattages. Significantly more performant, 20%, 30%, 40% more performance. I know the Fox has shown this off quite effectively with, I think, the 13-inch Flex tablet or something that has the similar chip.
Yeah, that's the Asus product, yeah.
Yeah, he clocked it down and he got some pretty good results out of it. Not like crazy results, but pretty good results. Then if you do feed it with more power, it can deliver something quite incredible, like you've mentioned, albeit with a lot more power. But they've shown that off this device, I think they had some photography of this device running at 57 watts, which is pretty extraordinary for a handheld. And part of how they've accommodated that is they have a dual fan thermal assembly and 4 heat pipes. And apparently to accommodate that large thermal assembly, they have integrated the 80 watt-hour battery as an external battery that you can kind of clip onto the back of the unit, or I presume you can just run it with a cable, on your bed or something, or by your side or something like that. I presume it's kind of like the Apple approach with their Apple Vision Pro headset. Where you
I was about to say.
Yeah, you kind of have the cord dangling and the battery you put in your pocket or something. This could be a similar situation. So that's interesting, quite interesting. And, it actually could be reasonable, especially if you're like at home. It comes with a 180 watt power adapter, so I presume that uses like a barrel plug-in, not USB Type-C. But it comes with this power adapter. You can imagine just kind of plugging it in, playing it in bed. It's basically like as heavy as a Switch 2, but dramatically more powerful than anything else in the market. That's kind of cool. I think that could be a useful use case. Also, just like, having the battery by your side. Again, if it's not weighing down the unit, I think it would be pretty heavy with that 80 watt-hour battery actually kind of stapled to the unit like they suggest. Then there's also the ANEO unit, which is a much more conventional device. It has an integrated battery, still has that top-end chip. There's far fewer details about that. Just browsing the ANEO site, I noticed they have so many products, and they just announced like 7 or 8 new products at this China Joy Tech conference there. So that's an impressive show of product force from such a small company. And I actually have some credence here potentially because I actually own an original INEO device. This came out in 2021. Very cool device, kind of a predecessor to all these PC handhelds we see in the market today. Windows-based device. This came out before the Steam Deck, well before the Steam Deck. I got mine in, I think, September 2021. Very cool device. They've gone from this to basically a lineup of, like, as far as I can tell, like 30 or 40 products, and now this massive upcoming Strix Halo device, which is pretty cool. So I'm excited to see what they do with it, but definitely the GPD win is the more exotic configuration for this chip.
Yeah, I mean, I'm just kind of baffled as to how this is possible. I mean, in theory, if this is possible, what's to stop Sony actually just putting the PS5 Pro APU in a handheld and be done with it? Just clock it down. I wonder how fast it would go, and how much more potentially efficient it could be as a monolithic chip. I mean, this is kind of like crazy stuff. So I'm really looking forward to seeing how this all plays out. But John, you must be having flashbacks to the Smack Z.
I was just thinking about the Smack Z. It's the beast itself. This ain't no Smack Z, but it'll have to do. Or when you held up that PC console looking thing before, it made me wonder if you still got your Subor over there, the Subor Z.
Yeah.
You got the Subor Z?
I do still have it, yeah. Uh-huh. For those who might not have seen that was essentially a Chinese PC, which was also going to be a console. And it did actually have a bespoke AMD APU in it. So it kind of had like a quad-core Ryzen 1000 CPU in there, married with I think it was Vega graphics. 8 gigs of GDDR memory, probably GDDR5 if memory serves. That device never came out, but selected outlets, I think Linus has got one, I think Dr. Ian Cutvis, I think he got one as well. But we got it, and it was in full retail packaging, and it had custom drivers whatnot for that APU. We should go back to it at some point and take a look. I
agree. We should do a video on that again.
It is still there. It's still in storage. It does. Work.
We need to get you Jackie Chan to sign it too, because he has history with Subor. So,
explain
the commercials. Well, there was an old Subor computer back in like the early '90s or late '80s where he was advertising it. Wow. It was actually like a Famicom system. NES shoved into like a full keyboard system with like a cartridge slot. It had the keyboard and learning applications and all kinds of stuff, and he was the spokesperson for it. So if you could get the unreleased Subor Z signed by Jackie Chan, you'd have the most valuable product in the world.
Yeah, seemingly.
But yeah, I mean, all the INEO stuff, GPD, this stuff's. When I open up that site and you're like, wait, they're shoving an APU that big into a handheld, it's like, that thing is nuts.
The PCB is quite something.
It's so chunky, man. Like, wow, we really are reaching like next level in terms of size. And the battery pack thing reminds me, I mean, like the Game Gear back in the day, which was huge at the time. You could actually buy a clip-on battery pack that you'd plug in and like clip it to your belt and walk around. And so that's what it's reminded me of.
That's kind of the way you use your ROG Ally, though, isn't it, Oliver? You use an external battery.
Yeah, and I dial it to like 30 odd watts, and I have some fun with that thing. But I mean, this is on a totally different level. Like,
this is nuts.
I think there probably is room for some like intermediate chip that is a little bit wider, a little bit bigger memory interface, things like this, that you can kind of clock low and have a bit of a better experience. But the 400 odd millimeter design that can go to like 57 watts, way higher than that, obviously, in desktop configurations. It's just the kind of thing that you wouldn't really think would work, and it doesn't seem like it should work, but kind of within that order of magnitude between like 15 watts and 150 watts, it kind of seems to scale okay. So it actually might produce a colorably good result here, albeit one that comes at the cost of potentially having a very large device or a device that doesn't even have an internal way to power itself.
So I think it's neat that all these different devices exist. There's so many of them being made, and they're basically like, it's like a gaming take on like a more portable style laptop. I actually grabbed for the One X player that I have here. I actually grabbed a little keyboard cover for it that protects the screen, but you flip it down, it's got a keyboard and a trackpad in it, and with a little kickstand, you use it like a little tiny laptop. But it's still also a little gaming device, so I don't know. These things are fun to mess with.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
But still, for actual PC gaming on the go, the Steam Deck is still easiest. Or Bazite, that Linux, that install, that Steam OS is just, it's so good for this kind of stuff.
Windows makes this kind of a non-starter in a lot of respects, unless you can get Bazite running. That's the other thing that is unstated in these conversations, but I think is the default as well.
Yeah, that's fair enough. Yeah. I mean, this chip really is, it's quite remarkable. It's got, I think one of the primary limiting factors of a lot of these gaming APUs has been the 128-bit interface for memory. Which limits bandwidth. This has just got a 256-bit bus. 256 gigabytes per second of bandwidth. I mean, it's half a PS5, but it's working,
There's no mention of price here, is there?
Well, yes, and probably because we're looking at like $2,000 if you've got the AI Max the full fat one. But there are cut down versions of it which may be cheaper. And there's no real need for your gaming handheld to have 16 cores and 32 threads. I'm sorry. I mean, there is a 1 CCD version of that chip, which would probably be a better fit. We'll just have to wait and see. I mean, it's going to be interesting to see how it scales, bearing in mind the reduced power that's going to be flowing through that chip. But man, I mean, I love the fact it exists, and I suspect these will be like fairly low volume devices. But even so, I mean, it's kind of insanity, and I love it.
I'm still sad about that Ioneo Pocket, I guess, whatever it was, the one that you brought to Gamescom last year.
It was a little OLED device. I reviewed it. I liked it.
It was so cool.
But the screen had failed by the time.
The screen broke. Yeah, I got it. It was all discolored and weird and messed up. And that's a shame because the device seemed beautiful. And I like what Ioneo is doing with their like stylings and such. But dang.
Okay, let's move on. Next news topic. This is a game that John's been hugely excited about, and I'm just going to hand it over to him.
That's right. It's out. Earthion. Essentially, this is a brand new Mega Drive game in 2025. Genesis.
It's what we need in the year of our Lord 2025.
Agreed. But you'd say, John, the homebrew scene on the Mega Drive is huge already, right? There's a ton of new games coming out, which is fantastic. What makes this one extra special, though, is that we actually have someone that was there working and did some of the best stuff back in the day on the Mega Drive / Genesis when it was still current. They've returned. It's Yuzo Koshiro and his buddy Wada-san, they've worked together, this small team, to build a brand new game for the system. So as far as I know, this is like the first real example of a developer going back to hardware that they worked on like 30 plus years ago and like making something new for it. And I think that is super cool. So right now it does only have a Steam release, which is of course, running, I guess, like an emulation layer on top. So hopefully we get a cartridge version soon enough, but I have played through this, or not all the way through yet, because I'm trying to, master the game still, and you can't just like credit feed to the end, which is good. But this is essentially like the most impressive shooter game I've seen on this 16-bit hardware. They've really pulled out all the stops, and right away, like with the visual effects, the quality of the artwork, the animation frames, you can tell they have more cartridge space, because I guess what this kind of stuff and other games like Paprium and all that have revealed to me is like the Mega Drive was capable of a whole lot more than what we really knew back in the day. And I think it was more, that system was limited more by cartridge size, the cost of ROM chips for storing the graphics data. So a lot of games were very small, and that affected the visuals because everything's super tiled. Here they have more space available, it seems, and so they're able to do a lot of fancy, very detailed graphics and tile work, and just these really like awesome scenarios that like the game begins in space, and you have this beautiful, the ship actually flies out towards the screen, spins around, and then you see all these massive, super detailed, non-tiled looking background ships and everything that you're flying through and destroying. Eventually you make your way down through the Earth's atmosphere, and they have a whole scene there, and then you're flying over the ocean at sunset, tackling bosses across the waves before flying into like a ruined city, and it's weirdly and amazingly dramatic looking. And of course, Koshiro-san was known for, Streets of Rage, Bare Knuckle series, the music there, the ActRaiser soundtrack. Like, he's done so much amazing music over the years, and this is no exception. It's one of the best sounding things I've ever heard come out of the Mega Drive to this date. Like, just the quality of the instrumentations. Like, you can tell he really understands exactly how to use the sound hardware in this system, which we already knew, right? Like, it's not, but he still has it. And the compositions are great. And it sounds very different from like Streets of Rage. It's not that sort of 90s dance music. It's more almost Konami-like in a way, but with its own twist. This basically almost feels like an arcade game from that era, as opposed to just a normal console game in terms of just the quality of everything happening. And I think that's just super, super cool to see. So it's like $20 right now on Steam. There's other versions coming down the line. It launched on Steam first, but like it's just the sheer like legacy of what this creation actually means, I think is something super cool and that should be celebrated. And also just the game itself is just an absolute blast to play if you're into these like old school 2D shoot 'em ups. I mean, I feel like even Rich, who has a long history with the system from back in the day in your old Sega magazine days, I feel like you would really enjoy playing this and just kind of like sink into that old feeling of playing something new on the Mega Drive that's really pushing what the system can do.
Yeah, I mean, I'd love to see it. I've got a couple of questions, John. I mean, this extra memory, is there like a theoretical limit to how much memory you can give to a Mega Drive cartridge?
I'm sure there is a limit.
It's got to be like an addressable limit.
Right. Like, I don't know what, like, because you can do bank switching, of course. Right. I don't know the exact size of this game. I just know that, like, Paprium, which came out some years ago, that's been a crazy situation around it, but I've played that as well. I feel like that's like 96 megabits or something.
That's awesome.
It's a huge game, and you can tell, like, the amount of content and graphics in there is nuts. This one, there is a ROM file in the folder that comes out to 24 megabytes for Earthion, but it doesn't just, I tried it in Blastum, and it doesn't just like load up in an emulator. Who knows if there's a way to do that or not. There might be, but right now I couldn't get it going just on a quick test, so it's probably encrypted to some degree. But that was going to be my next question, as to whether you could take that ROM file and put it on like a flash cart and run it on original hardware. Yeah, so that's an interesting thing, and that's also like a concern, right? Like, that would be cool, but at the same time, that also runs the risk of people just sharing the ROM around online, right? And I want to see a game like this succeed more than anything else, because like I want to see more developers from back in the day take a chance on this kind of project, to go back to the roots. And I think having these sorts of constraints really brings out a lot of creativity. And of course, in the modern era, there has been a lot of work done to smooth out development, and people know more about how these old pieces of hardware work than they ever did back then. And it's all the shared knowledge, which really allows you to do some just really interesting things with it. Cool. So I was just thinking about back in the day when we used to get like preview or review code. We had these like PCBs that you just plug into the Mega Drive, and it had like flash chip sockets. Oh, wow. Yeah, and basically we would be supplied with just the chips. And so you'd have to take out the chips that were in the existing cartridge, put them aside, and then just insert these new chips into the various slots. And then you could, 50-50 as to whether it would boot or not. But it usually that's fun, actually. Yeah, because basically those chips were reusable. They could re-flash them. And so, we'd have to send back the chips. We get new chips in with new games and stuff like that. Oh, I wish you could have kept all those. Well, I keep, I'm sure I've told this anecdote before, but, there's a lot of game archivists that get in touch saying, you reviewed this game back in the day. Did you still have it?
And first of all, a lot of the games were sent back, or a lot of the games were on flash chips like that, which would have been sent back or would have degraded. But at the same time, there was a lot of stuff that just ended up in a skip outside the office, and that's the end of it. It's just carted away to landfill, which is probably not what these guys want to hear. But unfortunately, that is the reality.
I know. So I am quickly curious. I guess you were going to segue to Oliver there.
Yeah.
Like, as someone that did not grow up with the Mega Drive / Genesis, like when you see something like this, what do you think? Like, how does it strike you?
I'm just really confused because I'm on their website and it says there's no digital edition for the Sega Genesis. Couldn't they just put it up on the Sega Genesis eShop? I don't get it. That's so weird, John. Why would they just have it there? So that's my feedback. Is they should put it on the Sega Genesis eShop.
Well, it's closed, Oliver.
I've never even heard of a physical game before in my life. So
it was called the Sega Channel, Oliver, and you could digitally download games back in the mid '90s.
Oh, really? Okay.
But unfortunately, it's down. That was a service that. So there was actually digital downloads for the system back in the day.
Wow.
It was the first one to do it, I think. Or one of the first, but yeah, it was. You could browse. A lot of games came to the U.S. that didn't get cartridge releases because they showed up only on the Sega Channel. Wow. And my buddy Chris actually had the Sega Channel, and it was very bizarre to see that at the time. You could not even imagine. But
crazy stuff. Yeah, and of course there was the Satellaview, wasn't there?
Yeah, which had a lot of interesting. That did like satellite radio kind of broadcasts and stuff, where you'd be playing a game with a broadcast running, and there's some wild stuff there.
But it sounds like this one's a strong recommend then, John.
Yes, if you have any interest in this sort of game, I seriously just go support it, play it, enjoy it, let it wash over you, and have fun. And I got to get you a copy of this, Rich.
Absolutely.
I might gift one to you or something, because I need to hear your take on this.
Good stuff. It's time to move on now to Supporter Q&A, which is the part of the show where every week I ask our Patreon supporters to suggest topics, pass comments on the topics we're going to be discussing, and of course to pose their all-important questions. Going to start off with this one from Ephraim the Dream, and well, let's just get into it. Greetings, Foundry, an exclamation point. You chaps see the Switch juice gaining more performance over time via increased clock speeds and further optimization of the quote-unquote made for Switch DLSS. After playing DK Bonanza, I'm already begging for more power! Exclamation point. Cheers! Exclamation point. Yeah, John, I'm not. I've got two thoughts on this, because if we see what happened with Switch 1, there was some movement there, but it only ever happened in handheld. GPU clocks did increase over time as options to developers.
Yes.
But the docked clocks, as far as I'm aware, never changed at all.
I don't think they did.
No. So I don't know. I don't really see. I think it's going to be down to developers to just optimize to the hardware that they've got. And maybe there will be some sort of improvements with made for Switch DLSS, but I don't know. What do you think?
I'm pretty sure we're not going to see any movement in that sense.
Yeah.
So it's probably going to remain fixed, and we just have to hope for the best from the developers. I mean, in an unusual thing, obviously with DK Bonanza, the director, I think, came out before launch and noted that, we went more for the fun over the performance.
Right.
But I still think that's selling the game short, because I think it is largely 60 FPS. It's just, there's definitely some little dips here and there, and certain scenes definitely don't run as well as they should, but overall it's fine.
Yeah, it's interesting though, because I often listen to the way you guys present, frame rate drops within the context of the full game. And sometimes you say like, oh, it's 99%, 99.9% fine, but that's still like quite a lot of frames in the 0.1% over like 60 hours of gameplay, but it is kind of actually quite localized. And although there have been some comments that the later bosses can be quite impactful on that, I'm not sure full performance is actually, more performance is actually the answer there, because you look at the handheld game that actually has proper VRR and it's much improved. So, I just
Right.
think maybe if they actually properly implemented VRR on the dock side, that would probably go a long way to solving the problem.
Exactly, man. We really need docked VR, and we also need VR just to work properly, or support that 120 hertz output to get the full range. There's, but I feel like DK is the least of the concerns right now. We're just already seeing all kinds of weirdness with Switch 2 performance that concerns me, but we'll see.
Yeah, Oliver?
DK is also kind of a weird situation, especially with like the low CPU clock, because it's all voxel based, and I just feel like DK is a weird game to generalize from. Like it's doing different things to the system than other similar titles are doing, I think, on the system. But I would say, clock speeds could be improved for sure on the GPU. We did see that on Switch 1. I think the maximum clock rate on Switch 1 is like 461 megahertz or something. And at launch, it was like 304 megahertz, and then or 307 megahertz, I think, and then it was like 384 megahertz, and then 461. I don't know why I have those numbers in my head, but I think like, it was just a situation, I think, where I think probably Nintendo was getting feedback from developers that they needed to improve those clocks, and so they did. For more demanding titles, they did give developers that option. But I think this might depend on what Nintendo's plans look like for a Switch 2 revision, because at the moment, the Switch 2 has, I would say, not very good battery life. But I think Nintendo might be more inclined to open up those clock rates for game developers to use if they say in like a year or 2 years have like a 5nm Switch 2 revision that can easily handle the increased load, easily handle the increased power consumption without throwing up too much of a problem and still delivering like 3 or 4 hours of battery life. But if they don't have that model, then all the Switch 2 models, in their 8nm/10nm process are going to have, I would say, pretty poor battery life in those games, right? If they're significantly increasing the GPU clock in portable mode. So there are a lot of factors. Also, I would say the memory clock in portable mode is also decreased quite a bit. So that could be another area where potentially they would want to improve the performance of that silicon.
Yeah, it's interesting because I might be wrong here, but I'm pretty sure that those id Tech games on Switch 1 had some sort of dynamic GPU clocking going on there, where basically the clock speeds would go up if required, which is almost like PC-like behavior. The extent of the hit to battery life there, as long as it is only, occasionally going into that higher clock speed bracket when needed, it wouldn't have too much of an impact on battery life. And I actually think that, if you can guarantee 2 solid hours of battery life, anything beyond that's gravy. So if there was the opportunity to actually, because a lot of the games are running like at, 2 hours 15, 2 hours 30, if there was the sort of potential for a dynamic clock speed boost, to level performance where needed, that could maybe work. I would expect to see a lot more happening in the handheld side of things versus docked, though, because they've obviously done, a lot of work on ascertaining the thermal budgets and whatnot, running the GPU so much faster. So I wouldn't expect to see too much changing there. Okay, next question, and this one from Todd Weitzel. There's a lot of talk about the PS5 power-saving mode being effectively a new performance profile. Do you think it's intended to replace PS4 backwards compatibility as the quote-unquote forever platform for non-demanding indie games, retro collections, and the like? I guess that really depends, John, on what a quote-unquote forever platform is actually supposed to be, really, right?
Yeah, precisely. So, conceivably, this would extend the support to things like if we assume that the power saving mode is used for something like a handheld, right, to target sort of this lower spec, these sorts of games could easily fit within that power budget, and by targeting that, it sort of makes it very easy to bring this across to the widest number of platforms. And the handheld, of course, being a newer thing, is something they want to sell, whereas a lot of this stuff is still shipping on PS4, but they mentioned PS4 backwards compatibility, but I feel like most of this stuff is already PS5 native anyway these days, and PS4 itself will be continued to be phased out slowly. So it's kind of a weird point to make, to refer to it. I don't think they're specifically making this mode to phase out PS4 as the forever platform, because I don't really think it's considered that per se, but it does kind of take that place, in that it's an easier. The lower power mode is obviously going to be an easier target for these sorts of smaller games versus the big 3D stuff. And that automatically makes them suitable for whatever comes next if there's a lower power device.
Yeah. What do you reckon, Oliver?
I'm not too sure. It's not totally clear whether like this is something that game developers could implement and force for all users, or whether it's something that you only would get if you had this low power toggle selected in the system settings. Because Sony's messaging on it has been the latter. Maybe the former is a possibility, but so far it just seems like it's a user side toggle that the developer can choose to honor in their game or not, honor in their game, basically. But no, I think it's an optimization target for handheld play. I'd also expect that, it's not too far of a jump to imagine Sony potentially shipping that handheld SoC in a little $300 little box, like a PlayStation Vita TV kind of style device that would sit underneath your TV as like a little set-top home game console thing that would run PS5 software, PS6 software, whatever, in a reduced configuration there. That's also another possibility. But yeah, I would expect this is probably an optimization target for handheld play.
I mean, the PlayStation TV didn't actually do anything sales-wise, but I loved it. And I think primarily I loved it because it was one of those classic reveals, John, where it's the exec on stage reaching into his pocket to bring out a small device to show the users. That classic move from times gone by. We saw it with the DS. We saw it with the PSP, and I'm all for
the iPhone. That kind of stuff. There was a time when devices were small enough where you could do that to some excitement, but now I'm trying to imagine somebody pulling out one of these giant handhelds.
We had our own personal reveal of Xbox Series S coming out of a handbag. Do you remember that, John?
Okay, that was cool.
That was
actually
very cool.
I think it was Sarah did that, right?
Yeah.
Who was? Yeah, I think she came in with a handbag and she's like, "Check this out!" Kind of just like whoop, pulled it out. I'm just like, whoa.
I have to admit, I fell in love with the Series S at that point because it was actually, what I would consider to be a console. We were going through this phase where everything was getting bigger and bigger and bigger, and then suddenly out pops this cute little box that, was capable of running next generation games. Fantastic stuff. Anyway, let's move on. This question from some guy person. Hey, DF, why do you think people keep saying that, quote, we don't need any more graphical improvements, end quote, or they, again, open quote, they don't need to improve the graphics at all because they look like real life already, end quote. Are people ignorant of what real life looks like? Are people just not very observant? Do more people just need to watch DF? Well, on the latter point, definitely. John, what do you think about this one? I mean, we are reaching the point where there are sort of diminishing returns on rasterization. You can throw as many polygons as you like at a character model, for example, but you kind of don't need to unless you're in photo mode or whatever.
Well, I think he's talking more about just there's other stuff, right? If you look at when he says real life, if you look at high-end offline CG rendering, there's always a target to move forward towards.
Yeah.
Although with CG rendering, there's a lot of shortcuts taken, that stuff that's like not on screen or stuff that's really distant from there. It's often still done in low detail, interestingly. But I think the problem more than anything is I think when people say that, they're like, okay, I think these graphics look good enough. And I kind of get this in a sense because I do feel like we've reached a point where every bit forward, every little leap forward for a lot of these different elements comes at an insane expense. Just the amount of time it takes to create this stuff. Stuff like lighting and GI and ray tracing, I think, has been pretty awesome because it does not require nearly as much investment on that front, but to get to the extra levels of detail and fidelity that actually matches it's close to real life. I think that's just, I just don't see how we can get there without budgets and such continuing to explode even further. They're going to have to leverage a lot of generation stuff where you're actually generating things in real time, not necessarily AI, but procedural techniques and other things that can kind of simulate real life elements. But just getting to true photorealism, man, that is a giant leap, and I I mean, I assume we'll eventually somehow maybe get there, but is that ever going to be really viable for game creation? I don't know yet. It's still a long way away.
What do you think, Oliver?
I mean, obviously game graphics look great already. I think if you go back to any of our respective youths or earlier periods, obviously game graphics have progressed enormously since those periods. But I tend to think that people put more value in graphics than they tend to kind of intellectualize, because I think the feelings that games evoke are really closely tied to their visual presentation, and gamers are kind of drawn to those more lifelike visuals, and they are drawn to that kind of more exciting visual presentation. And I think that's part of the appeal of a game like, for instance, Battlefield 6. Like, if you look back to Battlefield 3, for instance, like, that's a game that I could play today. Still plays great, still feels great, still feels reasonably modern in like a good first-person shooter multiplayer game. And I think people are excited for the new Battlefield in large part because it does look so dramatically better than Battlefield 3 or like the Battlefield games of the past. I feel like that's part of it, even if they aren't like looking at the image and saying, I appreciate it because it looks more realistic, it looks more vibrant, it's giving me that kind of CG kind of impression visually. I think they are actually perceiving that in the moment to moment and appreciating that and just ascribing that feeling to something else.
A lot of these comments come from social media posts where, I mean, it was actually your comment on Battlefield that sort of highlighted it to me, where, you know, somebody posted some footage from Battlefield 3 and it was like, this was running on a PlayStation 3. And yeah, you know, Battlefield 3 was a good game for its time, visually quite impressive for its time. And there were certain elements of Battlefield that still, you know, hold up today, even the PlayStation 3 version. But it is the case that if you actually go back and play those games, they are in a, you know, they're very much of a last gen sort of look and feel. Mm-hmm. It's always kind of like grey skies and reflective floors that seem to end up in those kind of posts, if you noticed. It's kind of like flat lighting and lots of shiny floors that seem to turn up there. But it is the case, and it's similarly the case even when you're looking at YouTube footage today, where the games just look so much better in person, and there's some sort of crapifying filter that streaming video does to games that you know, sort of diminishes their impact. Probably, you know, as fidelity increases and streaming quality doesn't, it kind of does a disservice to those games and is almost a leveler with what you might have seen before. I think, you know, graphical fidelity is just going to get better and better, and, you know, next generation, it's pretty clear where we're going. Mark Cerny's basically told us, it's, you know, only so much more we can do with rasterization. There's so much more we can do with ray tracing and machine learning. And that's where the gains are going to come from. And that's what NVIDIA is taking point on. That's kind of the way it's going to be. Let's move on. This question from Max Fletcher. Hi, gents, exclamation point. What is the possibility we could see FSR3 frame generation used on Switch 2 in combination with DLSS for upscaling? Could it be a possible way to get some use out of the 120 hertz screen? Thanks as always, exclamation point. I'm going to quickly come up with some thoughts on this, because you could, in theory, use FSR3 frame generation or a lot of other different types of frame generation, because, you know, we've seen it on Steam Deck, right? And so if the Steam Deck can do it, then Switch 2 can do it. However, I just think it's far more likely that some sort of lightweight version of DLSS frame generation will be used, because we've now got a fully AI-based rendition of frame generation that's now used on 40 series. I don't see any reason why it couldn't be backported to Ampere 30 series to run on Switch 2. What do you reckon, John?
Yeah, I reckon that's indeed possible. Either solution, actually. And it would be a good way to take advantage of that 120 hertz screen. I think frame gen from 60 is quite viable and usable. Mm-hmm.
The blurry screen would help as well, wouldn't it?
The blurry screen would help. It would kind of hide artifacts there for sure. I think it would be cool to see this, because so far the amount, you know, I think 120 FPS games are pretty limited. There is at least one out there now, finally. I haven't tried it yet, this version, but the Switch version of East 10, the unfortunately named Proud Nordics, is 120 frames per second in performance mode, which is cool. I guess Metroid Prime 4, whenever that hits, they promised a 120 mode as well, right?
Yeah, we saw it at the in-person
you saw
event.
it. Cool.
It is indeed very, very nice.
That's awesome. So there's some coming, but you're right. It's not a common thing. And I feel like, for 60 games that are already doing 60, having a, ultra performance 120 mode would make a lot of sense.
Yeah.
Great.
And also, even if you're in like 90 FPS territory from frame generation, it still kind of works. You've got VRR as well.
Yeah,
I think
exactly.
there's a lot of potential there. What do you reckon, Oliver?
I think like with FSR3 in particular, it's just expensive. Like I think we see it on Steam Deck.
Right.
It just ends up being kind of expensive. You can kind of do it from some titles to go from 30 FPS to 60 FPS, but is that really a good experience? I would venture probably not. I think something like DLSS frame generation could work if they were able to develop a very lightweight version of DLSS frame generation. But absent that, I think FSR3 is probably too expensive, especially if you're doing like 60 to 120. That's pretty demanding in terms of the kind of FSR portion of the frame time there. I don't think that would necessarily be viable. And I'm not sure that DLSS frame generation would be either, at least in its regular kind of 40 series, 50 series form.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a fair point. Okay, let's move on. This question from Shy Link. Hello, gents. I recently watched Iceberg Law's video, Everybody Hates Ray Tracing, and was reminded of a previous direct in which you discussed some gamers' frustration with quote-unquote forced ray tracing. As an impoverished console gamer that only follows advances in PC graphics technology as something of a spectator sport, I'm curious, did any previous then new technology, such as pixel shaders, etc., have such a high performance penalty relative to its subjective benefits in the eyes of the average player? And John, we've talked about this several times before, haven't we? And it's nothing new. It's basically every major advance that comes along. Somebody says
every time
there's no visual return that it justifies the performance cost, and also there was just a different mentality to demanding games in the past. What would happen if Crysis came out today?
Or anything before, like PC gaming used to be about that, pushing the envelope forward. I mean, I remember Origin Systems back in the day when they were pushing stuff like Crusader No Remorse, and various other types of games, or EA's, like, what was it? It was the U.S. Navy fighters comes along. MechWarrior 2 comes along with its 1024 by 768 mode, 3D accelerators first arriving, pixel shader stuff, and all that HDR pipelines. When all of this stuff was hitting, it was significantly heavier in terms of the impact on performance than I would argue ray tracing has been. Ray tracing's heavy, but when you're talking about like 90s, 2000s era, like adding new features, we're talking like frame rates in the teens, sometimes worse depending on your hardware. Like this was not performance stuff. It was like, this is new stuff, and the new stuff, just being able to display it at all was exciting back then. And the frame rate expectations were completely different at the time. 60 FPS was a gosh darn luxury. When 3D accelerator cards were first hitting, you'd actually look on the back of the box and it would say, you get all these effects at 30 frames per second. That was a feature, 30 frames per second was. That's where we were at back then. And obviously, that's not to say things haven't changed. Like, the expectations for frame rate are very different. But I am surprised at how PC gaming really went through that transformation where people just it became more about just high frame rates as opposed to pushing things forward, pushing technology forward. And I can see why, because I would say this is the fault of the PS360 generation, where those systems, this is when developers mainly moved to multi-platform. Before that, there was still a lot of development being done either just for PC or just for console. Never the two shall meet, except when they did, but that wasn't that common. But then PS360 generation comes along and almost everything's multi-platform. And because the PS360 were around for so long and fairly weak after, a few years, PCs just blitz through it. PC gaming was all about just pushing high frame rates, and there wasn't really a lot of innovation happening in the graphics themselves. It was just taking what existed and running it faster.
Mm-hmm.
And then ray tracing was the first return to that in a long time, where it was like, here's a fundamentally different way of rendering things. This is new. And I feel like a lot of people that were then into PC gaming, they didn't grow up with the way it used to be. They don't remember that, and they don't frankly care. They just know that they're not getting their high frame rates anymore, and they don't like that. And I don't agree with them, but I do understand where they're coming from in that sense. So it's a tricky situation just because the PC gaming landscape has changed so darn much compared to where it used to be.
I mean, there's so many PC sort of innovations that came about and basically depressed performance. Even when, DX11 came along, games got DX11 patch upgrades that just tanked performance and weren't really worth bothering with. But
and even I go back to when Quake came out, right?
Yeah.
Hugely important game, demanding game. Quake was a game where my PC, it was a year and a half old when Quake 1 came out. It could run the game at about 2 to 3 frames a second.
Yeah.
In the smallest window. But I didn't, I didn't like that, but I was like, man, this is the future. Look at this. So when I upgraded, it was awesome to be able to run it smoothly. There was a lot of stuff like that. I mean, there was even games I remember mentioning, like MDK from Shiny didn't run on anything except for a Pentium and above. And it would actually just straight up say, you can't play this. Sorry. It wouldn't even boot on a 486. So you don't have the necessary hardware. You can't play this game, which is something that's pretty much unheard of today. You can usually force anything. I mean, I saw some guy trying to run Windows 11 on 256 megabytes of memory recently, and I was laughing the whole way. He somehow did it, but it took 40 minutes to boot, which is great. But so I don't know. I think the reaction is just the difference in the way the market is. Yeah. And like I said, I don't really blame them. If you got into PC gaming a bit later and you're expecting something completely different than what it used to be, that's how the market played out. And yeah, something like ray tracing, it is heavy. I think it's necessary though, and we're in that growing pains period, but I think we're coming out the other side, because you look at Doom, the Dark Ages, which restarted this conversation. That thing freaking runs on the earliest ray tracing capable GPUs pretty darn well. It's very playable. You can play this thing on a 2060.
Yeah. Yeah, Alex showed
which is super cool, right?
Yeah, in actual fact, Alex's Doom video was quite sort of exceptional in showing that when the original Doom came out, the high-end PCs were struggling with it. And what actually amused me about that is that they had that kind of fat pixel mode, performance mode, if you like, which is essentially the most basic form of upscaling. The original Doom had an upscaler.
It kind of did. Yeah. You're absolutely right. It just doubled the pixel width.
Yes. And you're quite right. I mean, I remember upgrading for Doom. I remember upgrading for a bunch of games, simply because you saw them and you had to play them, and it drove an upgrade. But now it's like, hey, I've already spent X amount on a GPU 5 years ago. I demand great performance.
I mean, yeah. Back then, let's say you got a brand new Pentium system, like a Pentium 133. It's great. Then literally, within the next 6 months, 3DFX drops the Voodoo or something, or the Rendition Verite comes out. That's more money you got to drop, because around that time, there's going to be games that won't run, or will run much, much worse. That now you need a 3D card for.
Yep, and Quake is another classic where I remember, because we bought a new games PC for the office, and it was 486 based, and it ran everything great, right? And then the Quake demo dropped, and it's single digit frame rates on a tiny window, and it's Carmack's basically saying, yeah, you're going to need a Pentium to play this at a decent experience, and it's like, well, okay. Let's do it.
It's just wild, the amount of stuff that was happening within such a short period of time, right? You could get a 48666, but then the Pentium hits, and then now there's 3D graphics cards. This is all in the span of 2 or 3 years. Yep. It's the same weird time scale thing. When you think about Nintendo 64, and then you have Dreamcast, right? The N64 came out 2.5 years before Dreamcast, basically. Like, that's nothing, right? That's less time than the mid-gen refresh that we see for modern consoles, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's like, oh, here's a new generation 2.5 years later, basically. I think that's absolutely insane. Like, the speed at which things were changing. You were if you wanted to keep up, you had to buy this stuff, and it was happening so fast in a way that just does not happen anymore.
Yeah.
Like, that's why my argument was like, look, if you had if these games don't support a graphics card from 10 years ago, it's like tough. Like, I'm sorry. Like, that's 10 years of support for graphics card is amazing. That's a ton of support. But eventually for the good of the medium, you got to move on. Like,
yeah. I'd say we got it easy compared to the 90s for sure.
Big time.
I'm curious about your take on this, Oliver, because obviously it's a different era for you.
A slightly different era. Yeah, I mean, when I was playing on PCs for the first time, that was like 2004 or so. Oh. And I it's a bit of a different era, but I mean, I still remember back then when you were playing with like chipset graphics, integrated graphics on those laptops. It was a totally different category of experience. Like, you could still play the same games mostly, although there were some games, like I remember I couldn't play Battlefield 2 because it required 120 megabytes of VRAM, and my chipset only had 64 megabytes of VRAM, so I couldn't play it. There were lots of instances like that where you just flat out could not play a new game, and that certainly is very rare today. Like, on almost any integrated graphics system, you can play everything. Just the poor frame rates, right? There's never really a hard cutoff, or very rarely a hard cutoff. And certainly back then, playing a game like Half-Life 2, it was pretty miserable. But you could play like World of Warcraft on it, okay, at like, 15, 20 FPS. Again, okay, it's a different kind of standard relative to what people are used to today. So even in that context, when I got my first gaming desktop in 2005 with a 6800 GT and an AMD Athlon 3800 Plus, that was like a total revelation in terms of the kinds of games I could play. I could play basically everything that I wanted to at good frame rates and resolutions. And like that was a big difference before, like when you were going from the low end kit to the high end kit throughout the kind of graphic stack. Even in those days, which is like relatively late compared to the time periods that you guys are referencing, but it was just a totally different caliber of experience in a way that's like hard to grasp for a modern graphics product, where it's like, turn it down to medium, run it at 720p, it runs. It was not like that back in the day,
You would have been there for the Great Crisis debate, though.
I was playing Crysis, but by that time I had a more powerful PC with an 8800 GTX in it, so that was nice. That did pretty well. That was not too bad.
That was a bit of an event, the 8800 series for sure.
Yeah.
Okay. I guess that's it for that one, but let's move on to our final question. This one from Jonathan Hamilton, and it's a bit of a DF Direct deep cut, so there's going to be a lot of people that won't get the reference here, but does John have any cable draping tips for the Switch 2? With ports in 2 different positions and expert C potential. I think it was cord draping, wasn't it, back in the day?
It was cord draping, yeah. Exactly. I mean, everything I learned about cord draping, I learned from the Sega Dreamcast. With its the cable running out the bottom, and you kind of click it into the top and have to drape it a certain way. It's great. Oh, yeah, for the Switch, I mean, we have the Switch 2 that can do in docked mode. You can have portable mode, but there's also hammock mode. Where you connect a USB-C cable at the bottom and at the top, and then you sort of suspend it in midair.
Wow. Isn't that like crossing the streams in Ghostbusters? Doesn't it like lead to complete system failure?
It works, but it saves space. You don't have to have any place to set the Switch because it just floats in midair. It's like the Switch 2 Air.
Right, okay.
Like Nintendo once again beat Apple to the punch.
Yeah.
With the Switch 2 Air, because you can totally do that. So
Oliver,
you don't look convinced.
Yeah. You don't.
Oh man. Well, in terms of cord draping, I think that with the Switch 2, like if you kind of plug it in like this, right? If you have kind of a floppy cable, kind of a flaccid cable here, it doesn't really work so well. You get that draping. But I think if you have a stiffer
you
cable,
become
stiffer
flaccid.
USB Type-C, exactly.
Right, okay.
Stiffer USB Type-C cable, it doesn't really do that as much. But I actually did notice that. I did notice that because I've kind of forgotten that the system even has a bottom USB Type-C at this point. I'm always kind of using this and draping it in some capacity. So that's,
Well,
that's not...
in actuality, the real solution here is you just need a mouse bungee, you know.
Oh, yeah.
You guys familiar with those? Yeah.
No.
Where it's basically a little thing you place on your desk so that your cabled gaming mouse, you can run the wire through this like spring-loaded bungee thing so that it's basically floating in space. Well, not floating, but, you know, it's connected to this thing so that it's not just on the desk and draping off the side of the desk. It actually holds the cord in a way that gives it more flexibility as you move the mouse. So if you could attach a USB-C cable to that and then to the top of the Switch too, you're golden.
Wow. I mean, amazing stuff. I don't know what to say. I'm literally speechless.
They even sell mouse bungees with RGB lights.
Okay. I didn't know I needed this in my life, and to be frank, I still don't. But that was the final question, therefore the end of the show. So please do like, subscribe, share on the off chance you enjoyed it. Ring bells for notifications for you, potential algorithmic boosts for us. But please do consider supporting us via the DF supporter program. High quality video downloads of everything we do, the chance to contribute to DF Direct Weekly, early access to a bunch of stuff actually, news updates from the team, an amazing Discord community. It's all good stuff. But that's all from us on this one. And I guess we'll see you next week. Thanks for watching and supporting Digital Foundry.